Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. Well, the folks over at MSNBC's Morning Joe are having a bit of a meltdown over President Biden's clear missteps as of late, clearly physical and I would say cognitive missteps. And they seem to be looking for others to blame to change the narrative away from obvious concern by voters for his age and ability to do the job. Let's take a look at Mrs. Morning Joe and her thoughts on the matter.
Very carefully.
Yeah, I think his staff needs to own his age. I'm just going to be honest. I don't think they do a good job helping out the president. And I'm not talking about it like, I'm just saying if you are managing a president's schedule, and you are managing a president getting on stage and getting off stage and getting on planes and getting off planes. And yes, he's 80. You need to be there for him and you need to make a pathway. And you sure as hell better make sure he doesn't fall on a sandbag. And I blame the staff for that. I mean, these are the things that are going to hurt him. These are things that are going to be played on a loop. Okay, let him do his job. Let him do his speeches. Let him work on policy. Let him do his connections in Congress, unlike any president that we've seen, I don't know, since Clinton. But my God, make sure, your Secret Service, you're his staff, that you were there and you're telling him what's next. And it's not because don't take this as, oh, he can't even get from one place to another. When you're busy and you're on stage, and we've been on stage, right. I've done speeches and I'm so nervous. I'm doing the speech. I'm trying to get it right. And when it's done, I don't know which way to go. And I'm looking for direction. So do a better job. Because you can't have these video images of the president tripping or the president going the wrong way. It's not going to work in this presidency because his age is going to be a factor. His age is going to be a factor, and it's your job to make sure he gets from one place to another. He can handle the presidency. You have to handle his schedule and where he goes.
Well, and the scheduling.
It makes me mad.
The scheduling is so important. You have, with every president, you have different strengths, you have different weaknesses. If somebody were younger in the White House, they would manage his expectations to make sure that he never looked too young or too inexperienced. Biden's getting up there. He is slowing down, as Mike said. A lot of people forget I think he broke his foot.
Whoa, where do you even start with the Mr. and Mrs. Morning Joe, the fine married couple over there at MSNBC? Well, first of all, this takes gaslighting to an entirely different level. Again, disclaimer as always, I'm not a doctor. I don't wish Biden poor health, but I do have eyes, not to diagnose, but clearly he's not at his best. There's clear cognitive issues. There's clear physical issues. These things happen as you get older. It's nothing to be ashamed about, but it is a reason that maybe you don't run for president if you are having these issues. Maybe your family would step in if you're having these issues. Not all people at 80 have these issues. I would look at someone like Bernie Sanders. Obviously had a heart attack, but cognitively, he is not exhibiting these same symptoms. But it's just laughable, the clear pom-poms and misdirection, these DNC operatives pretending to be journalists. His staff needs to own his age. I don't even think they get paid enough to own his age. What does that mean? His staff needs to own his age. When they say your job is to manage a president getting on stage and off stage and on and off planes, how would his staff do that other than literally standing with him and next to him and holding him to make sure he does not trip going up the stairs going on a plane or down the stairs going on a plane? There have been incidences where he tripped going up the stairs on a plane. How would they manage him on or off stage? He tripped on stage during a speech at a military event. Mika said over a sandbag. How do you manage that other than literally being on stage with him, either right next to him, like on top of him, or holding his arm, which I've done, for my grandma who's no longer with us. I'm sure you have older relatives or friends, held on to them up or downstairs. It's very common. But how would Mika suggest his staff make sure he gets on or off stage with no incident, where that optically would be a problem if his staff is having to basically be caretakers optically for the president? When she's talking about, or kind of trying to muddy the waters, saying, I've given speeches where I'm so nervous and I don't know after the speech where I'm supposed to go, which way is off stage. Do you really think that's the problem with some of the video we've seen where he's clearly lost and doesn't know where the hell he is, where he's walking off stage at one point, looking clearly confused? Do you want his staff to be right in front of him holding cue cards, left, right? I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, but that would be the only really way to do it. And for most people, yeah, you could get momentarily lost, like, which way do I go? But it's in the eyes, it's in the face, it's in the body language. It's not just that he, in this incident, in this moment, doesn't know where to go. He's clearly doesn't, in many cases, seem all cognitively there, which again, there's no shame in, but he's the president. That's concerning, particularly when we are in a hot war, a proxy war with a nuclear power. So it's just laughable. And then Joe comes in with total distortions and deflections that this is really just an issue of managing the president's schedule. You got to manage the president's schedule. It's not an issue of clearly he's having physical balance issues because he's tripping repeatedly. Clearly he's having cognitive issues because he often is misstating words. He's jumbling his speech, has problems articulating, has problems finishing sentences. No, it's not a stutter, which has been their long-term gaslighting what it is. Because when he was vice president, he wasn't sounding like this. When he was a senator, he wasn't sounding like this. The stutter was not making him jumble his wording. When they say, Mika said, let him do his connections in Congress, unlike any president that we've seen. What connections in Congress? You bullshitted us that this was the guy who could get things done. This was the pragmatic choice. He could get Republicans over to work with Democrats. Nothing has gotten done. The only things that have gotten done are the same bipartisan corporate privatization schemes that only benefit the rich, like the bipartisan infrastructure deal that these millionaires on TV love, bipartisanship. Oh, the bygone era of civility in Washington and Democrats and Republicans working together. Biden hasn't gotten Republicans over to do anything of substance that would actually help working people. And he also hasn't gotten Democrats over to do anything of substance. I give you Manchin and Sinema, which Biden for 2 years would not use the bully pulpit of the presidency to go after them or go on a crusade or try to shame them into acting. Remember, the child tax credit, which was a good thing. I don't know about cutting poverty in half. I think that was a questionable claim, but it did help child poverty. Biden just let it expire because, Manchin and Sinema won't vote, or Manchin won't vote to extend it. But Mika says, let him do what he does best, working with Congress like no president we've seen. He's not doing anything. When they say your job is to get him from one place to another, that would be the pilot. That would be the limo driver. That would be the Secret Service. But once he's on stage, once he's getting on or off stage, again, unless you want the optics of having aides hold him up, I don't really know what can be done. And it's not, I'm not a fan of him politically, but it's not his fault. He is 80 years old. It seems to me there's clear signs of early something. Remember, obviously, there was a lot of reporting and rumors during Ronald Reagan's second term of his presidency that he had early something. And then in the early 90s, he disclosed that he had Alzheimer's. So this is common for folks of an older age, but because, it seems that the millionaires over at Morning Joe and MSNBC want to misdirect their viewers and gaslight America into thinking this is just a scheduling issue. This is actually his aides and staff that are the problem, not the president maybe shouldn't run again. He maybe shouldn't have run in the first place if he was having these issues. You know, go give speeches, write your memoirs, go, you know, hang out on the beach in Delaware. It's laughable, but it does seem interesting. So this was Mika yesterday, and then this morning, her husband came in. I have no idea. Maybe they got some angry frustrations for the White House. That's just speculation. But it seems like Joe came in to kind of mop that up a bit. Let's take a look.
Though doing a good job, needs to be out there every day, talking about what he's going to do to help people who are not yet feeling that. My rent went up. I mean, these are not things that Americans are necessarily feeling, especially in the middle class yet. And so there's a disconnect, and the Democrats need to make very clear, and Joe Biden needs to make very clear what he plans to do to make sure that everyday Americans are actually feeling these gains that we're seeing in the economic charts and data.
Yep. They've got a year to work on that, and there is that disconnect for a lot of people.
Well, you know, the thing is, at some point, though, substance matters. Like Donnie said, jobless rates, historic lows. Over the past year, the dollar has been at generational highs. Childhood poverty at record lows.
Yeah.
Teenage pregnancy at record lows, if you want to talk about social issues as well. You look at, again, unemployment for Black Americans, record lows. As we said before, this year, unemployment for Black men lower than unemployment for white men. And again, we're cheering for no side. We're just talking about the progress, though, that has been made across the board. Inflation now down almost to the levels that the Fed was looking for. Economically, this country is a $25 trillion GDP. $25 trillion. China's stagnant at 17 trillion. I've been saying on this show, and I will say this. I've been saying on this show for 15 years, when people are talking about the rising China, and you've heard, they've all said China's going to overtake us. They're so powerful, whatever. I just sit back and yawn and go, oh my God, it's at 1989 again? Do we want to talk about Japan buying 30 Rock and Pebble Beach? I mean, China, yes, China's a global threat. China has a closed society. China doesn't believe in competition. China is run by people that have a top-down approach. It will never, ever work in the long run. And the United States is proving it. And you know, I've got to say, Joe Biden, whether you're talking about economics, whether you're talking about NATO, whatever you're talking about, he's doing a great job.
No,
sometimes he has trouble riding a bike, but Chris Sell does as well.
Okay, let's not get started on that. It's called basic stage managing.
Right.
Let's not get started on that, husband. That's why I kind of speculated that maybe something happened between when Mika said that on Wednesday and then when Joe said that today. Either, you know, a spat between the two, or maybe MSNBC got contacted, because I don't think the White House wants MSNBC focusing on Biden's tripping and falling and stage management and et cetera, because that's their base. The MSNBC audience is Biden's base. The White House doesn't want their base having to hear about any of those issues. Let's just, pretend it doesn't exist. But, you got to love Joe Scarborough kind of mopping it up and with the fairy tales about the wonderful economy and, 25 trillion GDP. And as he says, we're not cheering for a side here. No, clearly you're not cheering for a side. He listed off the usual markers that millionaires on CNN, MSNBC, CNBC like to list off: low unemployment, high GDP, the stock market, blah, 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 blah. Then he gave some talking points about China. I mean, listen, Status Coup has been out there. We don't just sit in the studio. You want to know the real economy? You go out there and talk to people. You got a rising number of folks working more than one job in this country, in many cases working 3 jobs. This is from Market Watch. All you got to do, take a look. More people are working multiple jobs as Americans battle inflation and layoff anxiety. This from the Washington Post this week. Businesses are cutting workers' hours in a warning sign for the economy. The number of people working part-time for reasons beyond their control rose by 452,000 last month, the biggest jump in more than 3 years. We've also had a very significant rise in disability claims. I would venture to guess might have something to do with people having long-term COVID symptoms, even though the media and politicians have pretended COVID doesn't exist anymore. I can't think of any other reason you'd have such a rise in disability. I mean, the list goes on. Obviously, we've had the decimation of unions in this country for 40 years. Here's a most recent chart: union participation and income inequality. As you see, union rates and membership go way down over the last 40 years. Income rising for the top 10% of earners. That's Biden's, and it's not all Biden's fault, but that's the rosy great economy they're talking about. So it's not all Biden's fault. This is a bipartisan rigged system. This is a bipartisan new Gilded Age. This is a bipartisan economic Hunger Games. But it's kind of a problem when the information systems have been hijacked by a bunch of elitist millionaires in New York and DC, force feeding largely older audiences that are the most reliable voter, unfortunately. Not that all baby boomers vote establishment, plenty in our audience that are progressive, but kind of problem when the information systems have been hijacked by corporate media, basically gaslighting and lying on behalf of a president stumbling physically and mentally all over the place. We'll monitor the latest Morning Joe meltdown so you don't have to.